Welcome to Stillspeakpod. I have a coffee, it's 6:30 in the morning, and I'm ready to discuss Murdaughs. I actually recorded last night, but I had another recording incident where it deleted everything I said, which is very frustrating. Oh my God. And I gave up. I went to bed. I was like, all right, I'll just come back in the morning. So here I am. I may be talking lower or more calm than I normally am because I have 3 children. They're all sleeping. When I record at night, it's much quieter than it is in the morning because I record in my garage. So you hear everything outside, okay? I don't have a sound booth. I'm not a professional by any means. So you may hear some people starting their cars to go to work. For that, I apologize. Not much I can do about it. I also have a neighbor who seems to think it's wise to blow leaves at 7 a.m., so he should probably be starting here shortly. Anyways, I'm going to be doing this video a little bit differently. So we haven't talked about the Murdaughs in about 2 weeks. The last time was on the 9th of November. It is now the 22nd. And 2 weeks doesn't sound like a long time, but when it comes to the Murdaughs, it's a long time, okay? Because there's constantly developments. It's never-ending type of information. And so if you wait 2 weeks, you have a lot to talk about. And I was covering the Jake and Noah Claire and Amber Claire story and Heidi Plank and a few others too. So Murdaugh kind of went on hold for a minute. In a lot of cases, they start off busy and chaotic and fast, information, and then it usually goes quiet rather abruptly when you run out of things to discuss and information stops coming out, right? With the Murdaugh case, it's never ending. There's constantly, like I said, information flowing in. And so I thought to myself, the Murdaugh story is ongoing. It's not going anywhere, right? We're just going to keep getting more and more and more information. So I needed to kind of put it to the side for a moment and let me talk about a few other cases that were happening in the moment. And then we'll come back to it. So that's why it's been about 2 weeks. And in the last few days, I was curious about what the, environment was amongst people who are discussing the case. And so I went and listened to other channels' videos, some other podcasts, and I got to also feel for the formats that they're using. And I noticed that it varied from 15 to 20 minute videos of mostly just updates, excuse my voice, but mostly updates, and then some commentary, not much commentary. And those 15 to 20 minutes are really good for people who are currently following the case on a daily basis, because you don't have to recap or remind people of anything. For other people, the much longer videos that exist out there, like the 4-hour lives, are better for people who only get bits and pieces of the story or are not following at all times. I cannot pull off 15 to 20 minute videos. It's not who I am. Because when I'm discussing it, I need to talk about the context. I need to remind you. We need to refer back to things. We need to connect one thing to a new development, an old development to a new development, okay? And it's just not who I am. I cannot get all my thoughts out in 15 to 20 minutes. I feel like I would be not true to who I am. But I did notice that people do really like those 15 to 20 minute type videos. Some people just want to know the updates. They don't give a damn what I have to say, what my opinion is, what my view is, or anything of that nature, which is totally fine. And I'm not saying me specifically, but I'm saying whoever they're listening to, they just tell me the updates, tell me the facts, tell me what's going on, and leave your nonsense to yourself. That's how it feels. And that's, everybody's gonna like a different format. Some people really like discussing it, in depth, and others just want the quick sound bites. I probably would do 4-hour lives if I could pull that off, but I can't. I have a million other things going on and 3 kids, and I can definitely talk about this case for 4 hours straight, easy. But typically my Murdaugh videos last about an hour. So what I'm doing differently this time is I'm going to list out the updates that have happened since my last videos first. Then after that is done, I am going to add in some of my recent thoughts, where my views stand at this point, make some, comments about the updates. That way, if you come to the channel and you just want the updates, you can just listen to the updates. As soon as the updates are done, you can peace out and, not hear another word I have to say. And if you're curious and you want to know, then you can stick around and listen. So let's begin. So, updates. Alex Murdaugh was indicted at the end of this past week on 27 additional charges. 27. Prosecutors say he stole almost $5 million in settlement money that he obtained from his deceased housekeeper, Gloria Satterfield's sons, and an injured state trooper, and $4.8 million over the past 5 years. About $3.5 million of that was meant as insurance settlements for the sons of Alex's housekeeper, Gloria. The other money was, again, for the injured state trooper and other fees meant for his law firm. The 27 charges include 7 for money laundering, 4 for breach of trust, 7 of obtaining a signature or property by false pretenses, 8 of computer crimes, and 1 of forgery. The charges were laid out in 5 indictments describing 5 separate schemes in 5 counties where Murdaugh's firm operated, and some are a few years old, and some took place in the months before Maggie and Paul were killed. All 27 charges are felonies. They allege that Alex used the money to pay bank overdraft fees, credit card payments, and he wrote checks to friends, families, and for other items. And Alex allegedly stole $125,000 from a settlement from a state trooper who was injured in duty, and about $450,000 from 2 other clients who hired him to handle their personal injury cases. One of the indictments said that Alex had a fellow lawyer write checks for $792,000 in fees directly to him instead of his PED law firm, and said that the firm was okay with this and that, they gave its blessing, and that he also mentioned the reason for this was because of a possible civil liability in a case involving a boat crash in which a young woman died, which we know that was Mallory Beach, and Paul Murdaugh was charged criminally for that before his death. When the firm started to ask questions, Alex ended up only paying them $600,000, leaving the other lawyer to make up the remaining $192,000. I paused that briefly and it cut off my last word there. But anyways, lawyers from Murdaugh have asked the judge to throw out or postpone the Satterfield Sons lawsuits because they already received more than $6 million in legal settlements from Murdaugh's law firm and insurers of the attorney and bank. Alex's attorneys say that the criminal case over the Satterfield settlement involves the same allegations, making the civil suit unnecessary in their opinion. And That is true. The heirs have negotiated settlements alongside their lawyer in the excess of $6.5 million for their clients, with the most recent settlement coming from Palmetto State Bank and Murdaugh's former law firm, PMPED. And the settlement with Palmetto Bank was announced late last week, not long after the law firm had settled with them as well. Not only did they receive money from the Palmetto State Bank, they also received money from Westendorf, Fleming, Moss, Kuhn, and Fleming. Now, Fleming is Corey Fleming, okay? And Corey Fleming is Alex's longtime friend, and he's also a lawyer, and he was accused in the scheme to take the money from the Satterfield sons, and we talked about that in other videos. So there was a settlement with his law firm as well, and him, and the state bank. Now, that was the settlements they reached, and they received more than what the original settlement was for. But Alex is sitting here like, well, they all paid them, now I don't have to, is basically what his lawyers are trying to say. And it came out that one of Satterfield's sons was struggling really badly financially and actually lost the family home to repossession. And the lawyers for the sons basically said that Alex knew about it and he let it happen. He did. And the other son is a vulnerable adult. So they ended up getting pushed out to the street. Now, I don't know if it was the street specifically, but I think it more so meant they lost their home. Just a sort of figure of speech. And although that Palmetto State Bank never handled the settlement money, nor is it responsible for the actions of Alex Murdaugh, Palmetto State Bank and its board of directors basically made a decision to end the matter for the mutual benefit of the Satterfield sons, its customers, its shareholders, and the community as a whole, which basically means, they did not want the attention, they wanted it to go away, and therefore they settled. So Alex and his lawyers are like, well, they have been more than compensated for the $4.3 million they say they lost, which is very interesting wording because they aren't saying they lost that $4.3 million. It is now proven that they were never even given the $4.3 million to even lose it. So very interesting wording there. They also said that, the South Carolina law prohibits plaintiffs from obtaining a double recovery for the same injury. And they were asking the judge to dismiss the claims against Alex or suspend the lawsuit until the criminal case against Alex is finished. So basically their, game plan is, well, they got paid, somebody else took care of it, and Alex shouldn't have to also give them money, which I'm not really quite sure what money they're getting from Alex anyway, because we don't even know how much money Alex has or where the money is. But anyway, let's move on to the next update. One of the biggest updates, in my opinion, this is huge, is that 17 cashier's checks were written between October of 2020 and May of 2021 to Curtis Edward Smith. That's the man who was allegedly a part of the insurance scheme with Alex's shooting on the side of the road in September. And it's supposedly that the checks were written from the same bank account and that, it was deposited at different banks in South Carolina. The last check and payment from Murdaugh to Curtis Edward Smith was on May 28th, only 10 days before the deaths of Maggie and Paul Murdaugh. And all of the checks added up to $155,000 plus. Yes, $155,000 between October 2020 until May 28th of 2021. Another update was that on the 12th, attorneys of Hainsworth, Sinkler, and Boyd, PA, they filed a motion in Hampton County Court wanting to alter or amend the recent order that granted temporary co-receivers to preserve and manage Alex's assets. And they listed off all these different reasons, okay? And it varied. But the one that stood out the most, and I think is one of the most important because they wrote an entire paragraph about it, was this one. The court erred in failing to provide for some of the subject assets to be made available for the support and maintenance of the Murdaugh defendants. The order fails to provide for the Murdaughs to continue to maintain themselves through the course of this litigation, despite there being no adverse findings against them in this or any other civil or criminal action. Under the current order, Murdaugh cannot make bail or pay for attorneys despite his constitutional right to defend himself in both civil and criminal actions. Furthermore, Murdaugh cannot pay for medical treatment that he currently needs or pay for ongoing necessary and routine expenses, including food, groceries, or COBRA insurance. Similarly, under the current order, Buster Murdaugh has no place to live and no money for daily living expenses such as groceries or basic utilities. So just as a recap here, again, 27 charges now. He was indicted by a grand jury, 27 that added up to $4.8 million. Out of the $4.8 million, the 3.5 was meant for the settlement of the sons of Satterfield. And one of the people that he stole from was an injured state trooper. They're all felonies, and that was the first update. The second update was that Alex wants the case against him, the civil case against him for the sons, to be thrown out because they have been compensated by other people, and now him and his lawyers feel that he too should not have to also pay them, even though he's the one who stole from them. The next update was that the Satterfields did reach settlements with multiple people: Westendorf, Fleming, Moss, Kuhn, and Fleming, and several insurance companies, PMPED, and Palmetto State Bank. The next update was that, Curtis Edward Smith had a financial relationship with Alex Murdaugh between October 2020 and May 28, 2021, just days before the deaths of Maggie and Paul. And lastly, they wanted the order about the receivers that have to preserve and manage Alex's assets to be revoked so that they can pay for basic living expenses and groceries and a bunch of other reasons. So that's that. That's the update. Now we're going to talk. We're going to do some commentary and discuss here some of these things, some of my recent thoughts. And it's so frustrating because I already went through all of this and recorded last night. And now I get to do it all over again. But that's okay because I actually enjoyed discussing this case. So if you just wanted updates, there you go. You can move on with your life now. And if you want to stick around, let's go. My Murdaugh videos get the most views. People are just so fascinated by the story. They're really invested. And I get the most views on those videos. If you go through my channel, you will see it's like double with what all the other videos get. And due to that, of course, you have people who put thumbs down, which is fine. And by the way, thumbs up and thumbs down work for me. It's actually good for me, just in case you didn't know that. But, I always think about it because people are really invested in this story, and they're only following this story. And when you're only just following one story and you can invest whatever spare time you have into that story, you start to feel like, almost as if it's your story. You know every little detail, every word that was said, every single thing. You're just so invested, okay? And so if you come across somebody who, in your opinion, doesn't have every little intricate detail, you're just going to roll your eyes and be like, oh, God, And I've been there. I've done that before, where I have invested myself into one particular case and got so heavily invested in it. And anytime anybody came around with something that I felt was like, oh, give me a break, stupid type of opinion, I would be like, nah, that's not it. Because I was so set that I knew exactly what happened in that case. This is common, and there's nothing against it. They become obsessed. And I don't say obsessed in the sense of a negative way. I'm not using that word in a negative way. I'm using it in a positive way, because they're taking specific time to really get to know the case, okay? And there's nothing wrong with that. So, for me, on this channel, I'm covering multiple different cases at one time, and I'm a factual type of person, and so I really want to be able to make sure I have all my, I's dot, my T's crossed, and I'm bringing you as much of the facts as I can, separate the facts from the rumors, keep the story and people straight. And, sometimes there's a lot of details in cases, and so you have to keep track of all these things and constantly remind yourself of the details in certain cases. And with this case, I have not been following since day one. I heard about the murders, and then, I kind of just thought, well, that's kind of weird that they were murdered, but it's probably nothing. And I knew the basics of it, but I wasn't invested in it just yet until Alex's shooting. And then once Alex's shooting happened, I had to then backtrack and really find out all the little details. So no, there may be times that I don't have every little minute little thing down to, a science. So people might get upset with me because there's somebody who has been following since the beginning. And so, it's all good. When you put yourself out on YouTube, you got to expect that some people won't like you, and that's fine. I don't expect you to come here and automatically love me. And what I did want to point out, though, is sometimes those people who put the thumbs down will come on and, have a really quick little comment that's kind of snarky and basically tell me information I already know and I already discussed. Because what happens is they may hear like this video, for example, and think this is my first video on the Murdaughs. And meanwhile, I have I don't even know how many videos prior to this. So what you're telling me, I probably have already discussed. And you shouldn't just go off of this video. So if you are new here, I do have other Murdaugh videos. I have many of them. So if I don't say something here, it's because I probably have already said it or discussed it elsewhere in another video. I just wanted to point that out because some people don't go looking through the videos and don't realize, and they think I just pressed record and just started talking about this case with giving no backstory at all. When really, I've been doing videos on the Murdaughs probably 1 to 2 weeks apart from one another since September, beginning of September, for about 2.5 months. So there's quite a bit of videos. Anyway, let's move on. So I want to talk about the alibi. When I went around today listening to other people's podcasts and whatnot, I was noticing that every channel discussed an alibi that was different from one another. And we talked about this in another video because I said originally it was being reported that he went hunting that day or he was out hunting. And I came on here and I said, well, that's rather convenient because that gives him an explanation as to why he might have gunpowder residue on his hands if they even tested him for GSR. And then it came out from someplace else, a source or somebody said that he had an ironclad alibi, that he was with his sick, dying father. I believe he took him to the hospital or the doctors, and then he brought him home, and Alex visited with his mother who had dementia. And when I heard that, I'm like, well, that's also convenient, because then his father dies only a few days after Maggie and Paul, and then the mother has dementia. Okay? So how convenient of alibis are those? And it seems that nobody really knows what Alex's alibi is, because one video said he was out hunting, another video said he was out with his sick father, and another video said that he was, visiting his sick mother. So then it got me thinking, and I'm like, okay, they all think this. I'm not quite sure, because I've seen both claims, one that he was hunting and two that he was with his father and then his mother. So I was like, all right, maybe it was that he was hunting earlier in the day, then went to go pick up his father, take him to wherever he was, brought him home, and then visited with his mother with dementia. Which, if that's the case, holy freaking convenient, right? Not only do you have an explanation for gunshot residue, then you have your father who's deceased now, and rather quickly, probably quick enough that investigators never even got to speak to him. It was like 3 days after, and then your mother with dementia. Are you kidding me? This can't be the case. This cannot be the case that he has 3 of these alibis that are so convenient for the same day. Now, it's really, really hard, I think, to not consider the death of Alex's father being odd and wonder about it. Now, he was dying, allegedly, and sometimes people do die from a broken heart. So maybe he was crushed by the death of his grandson and Maggie Murdaugh, and he succumbed to what he was dying from. That is very possible, okay? The timing of it is just very shady. Very, very odd, even though it is possible that he just happened to succumb at that time. And now it's like, okay, well, if that was Alex's alibi, then it's not an ironclad alibi, because he's deceased. Unless you got some type of surveillance footage of him at the hospital or doctor's office, wherever they went, with his father. And even if you have that, it still doesn't cover what he did after that, because then Maggie and Paul, it said that they were killed around 9:30 at night. So you would need to somehow prove that he also met with his mother who had dementia, or who has, because I do believe she's still alive. But it is interesting that we really don't know for sure what Alex was doing that day. What we do know is that all 3 of these different stories, or all that are combined into one day, are very convenient, very interesting alibis. This case is so different and so out there and so complex that at this point in time, if it came out that Alex Murdaugh was directly or indirectly involved in the death of his wife and son, meaning he hired someone or did it himself, I would not be shocked in the least at all. I wouldn't be like, oh, I would not be shocked. I'd be like, oh, okay, yep, we knew. Yeah, seems that way. Now, if it came out that he wasn't involved in any way, that would shock me. It would. It would shock me. I'd be like, wow, really? Didn't see that one coming. It's just so hard for me to believe that all of this criminal activity was going on with Alex, and he had so much to hide. He had to really make sure that his mask didn't fall for all to see. And it just so happens that his wife and son get murdered by some random assailant or assailants. The odds of that just seems so slim to me that it's just 2 separate things. Alex has now painted a very good motive for wanting his wife and son dead, at least in my opinion. But let's backtrack here for a moment, because, like I said, I didn't really start getting really into the case until Alex's shooting in September. And at that time, I was shocked. When I saw the headline that Alex Murdaugh was now shot, I was like, oh, you gotta be kidding me. Like, what? Who's out for this family? I was like completely mind blown by this. And at that time, I only knew the basics, so it was easy for me to be very shocked by it. And I immediately was like, who wants this family dead? Like, what is going on here? I have to get on this story. This story is going to get wild. I can just feel it. And then all this little information was coming out that I was kind of looking at it side-eye, like, what's going on here? And then he released a statement. And in that statement, instead of saying, find the person who shot at me because they're probably the person who killed my wife and son, instead, he came out and he admitted to an opiate addiction and making bad decisions, and said that he was going to be resigning from his law firm. When I saw that statement, I was like, hold up. Wait a minute. What the hell is this? So you are on the side of the road, somebody attempts to kill you by shooting you in your head, and your first statement is to talk about having an opiate addiction, making bad decisions, and then blaming the deaths of your wife and son for exasperating these actions of yours. And he mentioned nothing about misappropriating funds or the fact that he was forced to resign, which we later find out. But just that statement in that moment when it was released, I immediately thought that was sketchy. I was like, that's the weirdest thing I've ever seen, because I was expecting to hear, hey, the person who shot at me shot at my wife and son. And what's, interesting is we eventually get the 911 call from that recently, and we discussed that in another video. And even in the 911 call, he's extremely calm. We know now why he was calm, because he allegedly planned this. He wasn't shot, directly in the head. His wound was more of a skull, scraping, fracture type of wound. And he was alive and well. He sounded totally fine in the 911 call. But if you listen, he never even says it then. On the 911 call, you would think with how calm and alert he sounded, he would have been like, my wife and son were killed a few months ago, and I think this person who just shot at me might be involved in their shooting. He doesn't mention it at all. While he's on this 911 call waiting for an ambulance to arrive, it never gets mentioned. So then what happened was, he puts out this statement, right? That was the initial statement. And then it was the law firm who put out the information that he had been misappropriating funds into the millions. Now remember, his brother Randy also worked at the same law firm. And this is how I think it went down. I think he was shot. I think the brother went to the hospital and he made sure that Alex was okay. Once he realized he was going to be okay, he basically said to him, listen, you need to make a statement saying that you're resigning from the company before we do it. And of course, he probably assumed that Alex would explain why he resigned from the company. Except Alex didn't do that. When he put out the statement with the help from his lawyer, it was, I have an opiate addiction, I've done really bad things, or made bad decisions. That's not the exact wording. And then he says, I'm resigning. And this is all because, it was exasperated by the deaths of my wife and son. Okay, pulled it up. Here's the exact words. The murders of my wife and son have caused an incredibly difficult time in my life. I have made a lot of decisions that I truly regret. I'm resigning from my law firm and entering rehab after a long battle that has been exacerbated by these murders. And of course, what's also interesting here is that it's implying that he's made decisions that were bad or that he regrets after the murder of Maggie and Paul. And that's not true. We know that he was making really bad decisions and having criminal behavior prior to their deaths. The only thing that happened after their deaths is that the public became aware of his criminal activity. It was not that he just started doing all this stuff after their deaths. So, yeah. So then what I think happened is once he put out this statement, the law firm was like, okay, well, that's not the statement we wanted you to give, so now we're going to have to tell everybody, okay? So they come out and they're like, hey, we hired a forensic accountant and we confronted Alex the day before his shooting about misappropriating of funds, and we asked him to resign. So they basically outed him, okay? And the reason why I think this is really important is because, in my opinion, I don't think Alex ever intended on dying that day. I know that's what's been alleged. I know that's how it may appear. But I actually think that the entire event was an attempt to change the headlines. He knew that the law firm was going to eventually have to tell people, and instead of the headline reading Alex Murdaugh, prominent, amazing lawyer, had to resign from his law firm, instead the headline now read, Alex Murdaugh shot in the head after wife and son murdered. And I think it was an attempt to buy more time, change the narrative, okay? And I think this statement that he made after he was shot kind of backs that up, because he avoided admitting his decisions that he made, that he regrets, and goes on to basically say, well, my wife and son were murdered, so this is why. And he made it about himself, okay, and not the people he stole from, not his wife and son. Okay, because he's like, well, I have an opiate addiction and I made these decisions and I'm resigning from the law firm, which made it seem like he decided to do that so that he could enter rehab. He made it all about himself. So Alex really didn't have any intention of coming out and admitting that he stole from people. Now, fast forward with these new charges. A spokesperson for Murdaugh made a statement, quote, "We have made it clear that Alex regrets that his actions have diverted attention from solving the murders of his wife Maggie and son Paul," unquote. And that's exactly what it's done, okay? Maggie and Paul have been lost in this entire story. It really has. And you almost at times forget about it. It's like a backstory, It's not the main story. It should be the main story, but it's not. And once they were killed, there was an investigation opened into Stephen Smith's death, then into Alex's shooting, Gloria Satterfield's death, the misappropriating of funds, and the insurance scheme. And so there's been all these different types of lawsuits and charges against Alex. He was arrested twice. He's been in jail for a while now. And all of the attention is on who? Alex Murdaugh. And while I want people to, charge him and take him to court and attempt to, recoup what was stolen from him, and hold him accountable, and I want all that to happen. At the same time, I want the deaths of Paul and Maggie to be solved. I think that there's been a lot of diversion This leads me to talk about this. So I saw a few people saying that, they don't believe that Alex killed his wife and son for financial reasons because he wouldn't have benefited in any way because his legal and financial problems would still be there with them being dead. And I get on the surface that thinking would make a lot of sense. But I think you gotta think of it a little bit deeper than that, because one of the key things I think is that in the civil suit filed by Mallory Beach's family against Buster and Alex Murdaugh because of the boat and the ID, etc., because of that, they kept asking Alex for his financial records, and he would not give them over. He had no intentions, and as a lawyer, he knew that eventually they were going to force him to give over those records. So by denying it and not doing it on his own accord, or saying, yeah, sure, I'll give you my financial records, he just kept saying, no, or pushing it off or ignoring them to, in my opinion, buy himself some time. Like I said, he's a lawyer, okay? So he knew that eventually he was going to be forced to do that. And what do you know? There was a motion filed just days prior to their deaths where the attorneys for Mallory Beach's family were asking the court to make him give over his financial records, and boom, what do you know? Paul and Maggie end up deceased. Now, that lawsuit, which included this financial record obtaining motion, was filed due to the actions of Alex's son, Paul. So Alex's son, Paul's actions, his bad behavior, was now going to cause Alex's financial issues and what he had been doing to come out. He was going to be exposed because of his son. If Paul never got into that boating accident and this lawsuit was never filed, there's a good chance that Alex could have gone on for much longer, possibly years, continuing to do what he was doing without anybody realizing, because it seems that he had been doing this for at least 5 or 6 years, possibly longer, prior to the deaths. There's no telling how long he would have carried it on had this murder not happened. Actually, erase that. Had the death of Mallory Beach not happened, the boating accident. I wouldn't classify it as a murder. It was a very tragic accident caused by somebody. I don't like to use the word narcissist because I think it gets used way too much. It's thrown around in every single case. I don't know if Alex is a narcissist. I would say that Alex is a very selfish human being, very self-absorbed, only worried about himself, and his actions prove that. He's not a good person. He's despicable, to be honest. He's not a good person at all. Not only did he steal from his housekeeper of 20 years' son, one of them was a vulnerable adult, and yet he had no problem stealing from them. And they also fell into such financial hardship that they lost their family home. He knew about it and didn't care. He also took and stole money from a state trooper who was injured on the job, whom does not make anywhere near the same amount of money as Alex Murdaugh was making. So that's completely horrible too. So, Alex is not a good person. And he was definitely wearing a mask, right? He was living a double life, basically. And we don't know how deep that double life was. But he was wearing a mask. He needed to maintain his family name, his reputation, and basically his son was going to be the cause for his downfall and for him to be exposed and that mask to slip down. Now, that could cause great resentment towards Paul. Okay? Complete resentment, anger, and just complete desperation at that point, at that he was going to have to share this information for all to see and know. And it could be why he blamed Paul for why this information was going to be found out. I think oftentimes when we think of criminals and their behavior and actions, we imagine them sitting at a kitchen table with a pros and cons list thinking like, well, if I do this, then that. And if I do this, then this will happen. But then that will happen. And that's not how it happens, though, okay? They're not sitting down with a pros and cons list. And it's easy for us to look back in hindsight with the information we know and come up with all sorts of things and look at it as a pros and cons type of situation than it actually being what happened. And when you become desperate, you definitely become irrational. And I talked about desperation in my videos about Noah Claire and Amber Claire. And if your desperation, hits a peak where you will literally do anything to save yourself because you feel like you have no way out, that can lead you to do awful things. And there's the neighbor with the blower for the leaves right on cue. It's 7:45 now. Anyways, so, it's definitely possible that Alex felt, resentment and anger towards his own son and became so desperate that he was willing to sacrifice his son to save himself. Now, Alex is a lawyer, so he knows how cases are handled once one of the people are dead in that case. So he would have known that once Paul was dead, his criminal charges would go away. It's also possible that there was a hope or irrational thought that once Paul was dead, that maybe the civil suit against him and Buster would be dropped out of sympathy. Oh my gosh, this man lost his wife and son, and it was Paul who caused the crash, and therefore we're going to drop our lawsuit. That definitely could have been one of his thoughts, that this would all go away. Everything related to this boat crash would just go away. And then you have to think about Maggie. Well, with Maggie, was she really looking to divorce him? Was she starting to learn about what he had been doing and had been confronting him? Was he worried about her finding out and didn't want her to know? So again, sacrificed her to save himself? Totally possible. Could it be the intended target was the son and she just happened to be there? Sure. Some people think that she was the intended target and Paul happened to be there. For me, I lean more towards they were both the intended target. There was no just happened to be there situation. And I say that because of the location of where they were killed. I feel that the person who did it knew they would be over there, that they were very familiar with the land, with their behavior, and knew they would be together. Now, I saw somebody else saying, well, why would he do that? Because killing them would start an investigation into their deaths, and all of his financials would have been exposed as well. Well, I have an easy answer for that. Maggie and Paul were killed. There was no investigation into Alex's financials that we were aware of. Maybe SLED was doing it on the side, of course, because that's what they do. But it was actually not until Alex's shooting on the side of the road that all this information about the misappropriating of funds came to light. So you had all of June, all of July, and all of August, okay? And if Alex's shooting on the side of the road didn't happen, would we ever have known about the misappropriating of funds? Would the law firm have, kept it quiet due to the deaths of Maggie and Paul. He also had no idea how much his story would blow up once Maggie and Paul were deceased. To know that people would be digging into this case, and by that I mean investigating reporters and lawyers like Eric Bland, who has helped the Satterfield Sons. And the reason the Satterfield Sons went looking for their settlement was because of investigating reporters who ascended onto Hampton County, and after Alex's shooting was reporting that they had settled their lawsuit for $500,000. And they were like, wait a minute, we haven't seen a dime of this. What are you talking about? So no, it doesn't appear that the murders did cause Alex to be exposed. It was Alex's actions later that actually ended up exposing a lot of this. Now let's backtrack here, okay? Stephen Smith was killed in July of 2015. That same year, Alex opened up that account, the Forge account, which we now know was connected to him taking some of these settlement money from his clients, and was basically putting it and hiding it under this account. These new charges go back as far as 5 years ago, which brings us to 2016, okay, which is a year after he opened up this account and a year after the death of Stephen Smith. And then in 2018, in January of 2018, is when he stole or started the plan to steal money from this injured state trooper. And then the next month, in February of 2018, is when Gloria has her fall. Later in that year, after she passed away, was the settlement, and in February of 2019 is the boating accident. By the spring, Paul Murdaugh was charged criminally for the death of Mallory Beach. Civil suits were filed, and Paul pled not guilty. Somewhere around this period of time is when the Satterfield Sons suit was actually settled, but they didn't find out about this until just recently. So now Paul's case was heading to trial because they tried to do mediation and it didn't work, right? Now, go forward to October of 2020, Alex starts writing cashier checks to Curtis Edward Smith. And he continued writing them October, November, December, January, February, March, April, and until May 28th. At least that's what we know so far, okay? And 10 days later, his wife and son are killed. You know what else happened in May of 2021? The settlement from the state trooper that was filed in January of 2018 was finally settled. The same month that he wrote a cashier's check to Curtis Edward Smith for the last time, at least as far as we know, the last time. That same month, he was borrowing money from John Parker, his colleague, okay? And then he took more money from Parker after the deaths. And then he took money from his brother, okay? But he had just gotten this $125,000 settlement from the state trooper's case. For me, I think Alex was trying to buy time in a lot of different circumstances. And I think that, getting the settlement money from the state trooper, then also getting money from Parker multiple times, it was 3 times, and then also his brother, I think was a way to kind of, fill up his bank accounts, or try to, so that when eventually financial records were taken, they would appear to be on the up and up. But he couldn't figure out how to do that fast enough. And he was running out of time. And I think once the law firm confronted him, he was like, oh, shit, What am I going to do? I need to buy myself more time. And I think this whole event on the side of the road kind of came to fruition. And I don't think that he ever intended to die that day. I do not believe it. I don't. I think he just wanted to control the narrative and buy himself even more time, except a law firm appears to have been like, nah, bro, not so fast. We're outing you. Especially after he gives this statement where he says, I'm resigning and I have this opiate addiction, never mentioning that he stole money from anybody. He doesn't apologize for it. He doesn't apologize to them, so that would piss them off. Like, how do you not say, this is why I'm resigning? You kind of, tip-tapped around it. So they come out, and then he's forced to be like, yeah, I did that. Let's talk about Curtis Edward Smith here real quickly. Now, he lost credibility with me when he changed his story, and we discussed it in another video. His original story was, I got there, Alex got out of the car, he was brandishing a gun, he was kind of like waving it around, and I ran over to get the gun away from him, and the gun went off. And then I panicked, and I took the gun, and I disposed of the gun. But then later, he changed the story. And the story was that he got there, Alex got out of the car, he handed him the gun and said, shoot me in the back of the head. He said no, and then I guess they had a scuffle and the gun went off, which is a different version. Then he tried claiming that Alex was trying to set him up, which is totally possible, but he also had his lawyer say, or his lawyer did say for him, my client has not taken any money from Alex Murdaugh. Well, his lawyer probably should have done some homework because now there's proof that he did. The thing about this is, though, the money started October of 2020, and this shooting didn't happen till 11 months later. So this money that he was giving to him for, October, November, December, January, February, March, April, May, which is about 8 months, if I counted right, could not have been for the shooting on the side of the road. It just couldn't have been. Right? Because the whole idea was that, he wanted to end his life. This was the initial claim. He wanted to end his life. It was, all this stuff, the deaths of his son and wife. Of course, then he's, forced to have to admit that he set it up to get an insurance scheme going so that Buster can get $10 million. Well, it wouldn't have just been Buster if Paul and Maggie weren't killed. And the only way he would have known that it was only going to be Buster was if he knew Maggie and Paul were going to die. Okay? So I don't believe that this money has anything to do with the shooting on the side of the road. Because what was alleged was that Alex paid Curtis to do this shooting. And I said in another video, well, if that's the case, then where the hell is the money? Did they not do a search warrant on his home to look for cash? Did they not get a search warrant for his bank accounts, meaning Curtis Edward Smith? I mean, if it's easy to prove if this really happened, if you can somehow find this money. And it appears Alex was writing him cashier checks for another reason. So there's got to be some type of money trail that leads back to the actual shooting in September of 2021. And with that proof, it would be easy to say to Curtis Edward Smith, nice try, buddy. We have the payment that he gave you. And there's no way in hell that I believe that $155,000 went to drugs over an 8-month period of time. I know people who used to have opiate addiction who are in recovery, who make nowhere near that amount of money in a year, let alone 8 months. And, no, there's no way that was drugs. I just don't believe that at all. So then you have to consider, was Curtis helping, Alex to launder, money? Launder. Ugh, it's too early. Money. Was he writing these checks for him, and was Curtis in on it, and, Alex giving him a portion of the money and said, hey, I'm going to give you this money, put it here, put it there, keep it here, whatever, who knows? But it's definitely easy to sit here and go, was this $155,000 payment for Curtis to kill Paul and Maggie? Allegedly, possibly, maybe, not saying that's a fact. Just trying to cover my ass here. Yeah, I mean, that's really easy to consider. $155,000? Yeah. Which brings me back to Curtis Edward Smith's first interview when he gave the first version of the story and then later changed it. And in that he said, quote, "I've never had a reason not to like him before. I understand he's in fight or flight mode and he wanted me to be the heavyweight in the water so he could fly," unquote. He also said, quote, "I wouldn't advise him to try to set me up. I'd strongly advise him against that," unquote. Sounds like a threat, right? So is this Curtis's way of sending a message to Alex Murdaugh? Is this kind of like, listen, I know what you've been doing. I will out your ass so fast if you try to set me up here, bud. You better watch your move. Like, is that what he's trying to say? Or is it possible that, he was involved in the death of Maggie and Paul, and he's basically sending a message of, listen, if you don't quit it, or if you even try to set me up here, I will, point or implicate you in the deaths of your wife and son. It definitely feels like he was trying to talk to Alex via the media at minimum. What his motive for it, we don't know, but you can come to all different conclusions. But I mean, he literally says, "I strongly advise him against that." So, and then what if he does? Then what? So that's why it sounds like a threat. And Curtis does, construction type of work, I believe. He couldn't have done $155,000 worth of work. I just don't believe that to be true at all. Because I also know friends in construction type jobs, and they don't make anywhere near that. Unless, of course, you're building, high rises and whatnot. So I think it's, how much does Curtis Edward Smith know? What does he know? What's the extent of what he knows? Did he know about Alex's schemes? Was he, involved in it? Did he give him the idea? Does he know whether or not Alex murdered his wife and son? Is he involved in the death of Maggie and Paul? There's a lot of questions here now that we know that there was a financial relationship between these two individuals, and one of the last payments being only 10 days prior to the deaths of Paul and Maggie. Is that another coincidence? There's a lot of coincidences in this case, and I've said in other videos, I believe in coincidences to an extent. If there's one or two, okay, you can kind of blow it off. When you have a lot of coincidences, not so much. So I think we're going to be hearing a lot more about Curtis Edward Smith at this point. I think we're going to get a lot more information, hear a little bit more about his involvement, what he knows, what he doesn't know, and whatnot. Which leads me back to the gun that he is refusing to retrieve and turn over to law enforcement. You would think that if he wanted to clear his name in the shooting of Alex in September, he would get that gun and turn it over. The gun was allegedly, given to him by Alex. And we know that two different guns were used to kill Paul and Maggie, which could have been a way to, make it seem like two people had killed them. And I think that's more likely than there was actually two people there, because then you would have to have two people who agreed and had enough motive to go there and kill these people. And I think the only way that it could have been two people is if it was somebody who was helping Alex with his other crimes. Because if they help Alex to hide his crimes, then they get to hide their crimes. But I talked about the gun. Now, there were 7 shell casings found at the scene of Alex's shooting, What the hell happened out there? That's a lot of shell casings. And I'm no gun expert. I should be, because when my husband was in the military, he did teach gun classes, and I should know more than I do, but I know the very basics. I know that some guns, it's one shot at a time. With others, there's multiple rapid shots, and, I know about shotguns, rifles, and pistols, basically. Anything more than that, I really don't know. And I know some other basic things because of other cases. And I know that, bullet wound exits and entry and things like that. But I'm not like a gun expert in the sense of like knowing brands and how they work and all that. And I'm not even going to sit here and pretend like I'm some type of expert, because I'm not. But you really have to wonder, why the hell would he not turn over this gun? Unless it's in an area that you can't get to, like water. But even still, why not tell law enforcement, this is where I dumped it, so they can go and retrieve it? There's a reason, and I don't think that it's a coincidence in any way that he is not willing to turn this gun in. Was this gun used in another crime? Was he really the one to fire the gun? And Alex was actually telling the truth, which, some people believe that some, drug dealer or somebody he stole money from, killed Paul and Maggie to send a message or to threaten Alex. Like, if we don't get our money, you're next. Honestly, stuff like that really only happens in, like, television shows. And I'm sure if it's happened in real life, there was other details to the story than this one. Because what benefit does somebody who's wanting money get from killing Paul and Maggie? There's no benefit. They're basically risking life in prison or the death penalty to get money. That doesn't make much sense. That's not a strong enough motive to send a message. But let's just say that was the case. Let's say they're like, all right, we'll kill his wife and son to be like, hey, you better stop it, or you better give us our money, and if you don't, you're next. Well, they get killed, he doesn't stop, and he also doesn't give them their money. Why didn't they then kill him? They had all of June, July, and August to do that, and they didn't. I think if, they went there and beat them up or held them captive or something to that effect, that would make more sense than if this person would go there to kill, a son, only 22 years old, and his mother, just to send a message to Alex Murdaugh. And it seems that a lot of Alex's victims didn't even know that he stole from them until recently, after his shooting and all the investigations into his money and the money trail came to be. As far as revenge, everybody that was on the boat who's still alive and the parents of Mallory Beach voluntarily gave over DNA. It'd be really freaking dumb of you to do it willingly and not by force if you were involved in the death of Paul and Maggie. But let's just say that one of them is involved. Why? It doesn't bring back Mallory, right? But you can just say, well, they're really angry and they want somebody to pay for her death, and they knew that Paul was going to get away with it because of who his family were, and therefore they took matters into their own hands and killed him and his mother. Like, let's look at Connor Cook, for example. He's suing because he alleges that, the Murdaughs were trying to point the finger at him for the cause of Mallory's death. So for him, it makes no sense that he would be angry that fingers were being pointed at him for the death of Mallory, but then he goes on to kill two people. That's contradicting. It doesn't make any sense. As far as her parents, they already had a lawsuit filed. They had the criminal charges filed. They we're going to go to trial. And they may have even considered that Paul may get away with it because of who he was and what family he came from. But they didn't even get to the point where they can see what happened. I would think it would make more sense if they had went to trial. Paul was found, not guilty. And then somebody took matters into their own hands and said, you know what, screw this, and then kill Paul. But they hadn't even gotten to trial yet to know whether or not he was going to be held responsible. And then Alex does a scheme that also involves a shooting, okay? And it wasn't even that he did it to make it seem like whoever tried to kill him also trying to kill his wife and son. His claim is that he did this, which I don't believe, so that he can get this insurance money for his son. So what's the odds here? I mean, really think about it. What are the odds that prominent, well-known Alex Murdaugh, whose family was big name in this area for freaking 100 years, who, went against the grain of the family and became this person who was doing all this criminal activity, which, hold up for a minute here, because it's very possible that the other members of the family were doing the same. We just don't know about it. But let's focus on Alex. He does all this criminal activity. It all starts, right around the time of Stephen Smith's death, then later Gloria Satterfield's death. It was going on during that. It was going on during Mallory Beach's death during the boating accident, and it was going on all the way up until his shooting on the side of the road. So he was doing all of this criminal activity, was in great financial disaster, okay? Stealing left and right from all these people, and was involved in this lawsuit for this boating accident, etc. And then the same guy then goes on to attempt to, fraud an insurance scheme, but he's not the one who killed his wife and son. Like, what are the odds of that? Honestly, you have to think about that. What are the odds that these are two separate things and not just one big thing? And that's why I said, if it comes out that Alex was involved, whether he pulled the trigger or hired a hitman or had somebody with him, it would not shock me at all. I'd be like, oh, we saw that coming from a mile away, right? But if it comes out that, no, Alex was this terrible, horrible, despicable type of person who did these horrible things to these vulnerable people, okay, injured people who lost their loved ones, etc., their homes. But nope, he didn't kill his wife and son. I would be like, what? Really? I would be totally floored. It seems everything leads back to Alex Murdaugh. The saga continues. Developments will continue to happen. But are we any closer to finding out who killed Paul and Maggie Murdaugh? The $1 million question for me here is this. Who had equal or as much motive for Paul and Maggie to be dead as Alex? Who benefited from the deaths of Paul and Maggie? Killing someone is a massive risk. Killing two people? Are you kidding? That's huge amount of risk. Double murder? You have to have some type of motivation behind that. And it's got to be pretty big. Something would have to really drive you to kill a mother and son. And I said in another video, their deaths seem very personal because one witnessed the other one being shot. It appears. If there was only one person there, whether it was Paul was shot first at point blank range, Maggie was trying to run away and she got shot, that means she witnessed Paul being killed and then was killed herself, or vice versa, right? Somebody alleged on the Dateline that that's how it happened, but it also could have been that Maggie was shot and Paul witnessed that and then Paul was also murdered. That's very personal. It's very, very personal to kill kill, somebody in front of somebody else who they love that person and then kill them afterwards. That tells me there was a lot of drive. There was feeling and emotion behind this. If it was a revenge kill, the emotion behind it would be explained for Paul, but not his mother. If it was a revenge kill against Alex's behavior, then why not kill him, not his wife and son? I'm going to wrap this up because my kid just came in. You might have heard the noise in the background. But anyways, just wanted to give out some of my thoughts here now that we now know there's an additional 27 charges that the grand jury came to a conclusion on, and he is facing 27 felonies on top of the felonies he was already charged with. Two other things real quickly. Going back to the statement that Curtis Edward Smith gave in his first interview with the New York Post, when he said, "I understand he's in fight or flight mode and he wanted me to be the heavyweight in the water so he could fly." That part. That goes back to what I was saying earlier about killing Paul. Basically willing to sacrifice somebody else to save himself so he could fly. And the other thing that I want to talk about before I wrap this up is, I don't know how many people know this, you might have heard that in 2009 there was a fire at the Murdaugh's home. It was a different home, and they arrested somebody, and it appears that it was basically a disgruntled worker, somebody who was working on the home. They set like furniture and stuff on the porch on fire, and they arrested the person. And that was in 2009. We know that he opened the Forge account in 2015, so we can assume that maybe his criminal activity started then. Although I'm not sure that they have gone back further than that just yet. We might find out that it went back even, further than that. And for all we know, this disgruntled worker may have also been in cahoots with Alex Murdaugh if Alex Murdaugh was doing criminal activity even back then, because Curtis Edward Smith also does similar type of work, and we know that Alex was giving him a significant amount of money for some reason. So was that like the original Curtis Edward Smith type person to Alex, and then later he switches to Curtis Edward Smith? I'm not quite sure. But probably not, because you would think that this person, once he was arrested, would then implicate Alex. Or maybe he, at that time, was setting this fire as an actual warning to Alex. That's more believable than somebody killing two family members to send a message. I believe the family was not even in the home when this fire had been started. You also have to consider that this person was paid to do that for an insurance settlement. But there's so very little known about it other than it was a worker and he was arrested. So we can come to all kinds of conclusions until we have more information or if anything comes to light about that situation. But the reason why I'm mentioning it is somebody in one of the groups, and bravo to them, found that a shed on Curtis Edward Smith's property actually caught fire in 2019, which was during the time that Alex was doing his criminal activity. And that's yet another coincidence that you have to say, okay, is this another coincidence or is this something more than that? It was almost 10 years to the day between these two fires. Now, Alex's lawyers allege that Curtis was, Alex's drug dealer, and I guess they're like cousins, like third cousins or something to that effect. And originally it was being reported that, he was a client of Alex and that Alex had represented Curtis prior. Before, I wasn't really sure how Curtis Edward Smith fit into the story. I was like, is this just some fool that Alex decided to, kind of bring into his situation in some way? But now knowing that there was this financial relationship between the two of them, I have to now consider that this man who's on TV trying to claim his innocence may know a lot more than we know so far, and that we're going to find out a lot more information about Curtis Edward Smith's involvement. So now I'm much more intrigued by this character, I would say, in the story of Curtis Edward Smith. Prosecutors are working overtime to uncover all this information. That's very clear. I mean, they brought to the grand jury 27 charges that we know of. They might have brought more that they ruled against charging him for. And even if Alex did not kill his wife and son directly or indirectly, he's going to jail for a long time, most likely, if he's found guilty in all these charges. So either way, he better make jail his home and get really comfy. And in the middle of all this, Buster Murdaugh lost his brother, his mother, his father's in jail. He's probably going to be there for a long time. All of his assets were frozen. His family name is destroyed. He was going to go be a lawyer, and now he's the son of Alex Murdaugh, the disgraced prominent lawyer of Hampton County and Colleton County. And these charges spread over 5 different counties, and then in addition, Hampton County. So 6 different counties. So it's not like, this is just one little tiny little county. No, they're disgraced in a lot of South Carolina. But is Alex totally innocent in all this and a total victim? We know very little about him, what he knows or doesn't know. If he truly is a victim, we don't know any of it. He has not spoken out at all, and there was only 2 sightings of him since the deaths of his brother and mother. One person's actions has caused a domino effect of lives being destroyed, and possibly 2 lives taken. We have to wait and stay tuned and see what happens. And now that my whole house is up and my neighbor is full-blown doing his blower at this point, I'm going to call it a day and go start my full day of things to do. There were other things I wanted to discuss as far as these charges specifically. I wanted to talk about each one, what some of the indictments said, and I kind of wanted to do a review of the timeline and really kind to try to, revise it and remember some parts of it. Because when a lot of information comes in, it's so easy to forget pieces of the story because you get information overload. So a little refresher video, basically. So I'll do that in the next few days, and we can continue to talk more Murdaugh. But now I gotta go, so enjoy your day, and until next time, I'll see you soon.